you wonderful people!
2020 is finally over and we can all agree it's been a great year for everybody.
A great year with some great board games. But today it's finally time to crown the very best one. Are you ready for the big reveal?
Boy, am I! It's the King's Dilemma! Wait. Oh, poo! The King's Dilemma is a shockingly good game, and I don't use the word shocking lightly because I was genuinely surprised by how good the mechanisms, the storytelling, the tension, the flow, the everything was. In The King's Dilemma, you play as scheming advisors to royalty, finagling your agendas into existence via bribery and machination. Each round, a new story card is drawn with some narrative text setting up, you guessed it, a dilemma with crushingly awful choices. Your job is to figure out which of these two awful choices suits your agenda best and then make sure it gets passed via a bidding system that feels reminiscent of Reiner Knizia's best bidding games, except it was designed by the people who brought you Railroad Inc. Plot twist! Even though you can glean some short-term mechanical effects, most of the time you don't even know what you're bidding for. And I mean that in the narrative and gameplay sense. Imagine not just spending all of your political influence, but also all of your wealth to convince the other players that yours is the right way, and then finding out that your chosen path resulted in the immediate death of the king and the end of the game at a state that's totally not what you signed up for. But did I mention that The King's Dilemma is also a campaign game? Losing at the flip of a card might sound awful, but your loss could turn out to not even be a loss. With each twist in the story, the game pivots into new grounds, and what was once awful might now be great. Most importantly, you and your friends, even though through gritted teeth, made these choices together. And when you arrive at one of the game's many endings, you'll know you've arrived there together. And this board that you've covered up with stickers through the course of the campaign is a tapestry, a history of your kingdom. It's your legacy. The King's Dilemma has been the breath fresh of air, not just into the burgeoning yet already stale genre of legacy games, but into board games in general. Here's a game with a story that just works, but it also blends that story with mechanisms with success absolutely no other game comes even close to. Although here I do have to note that this fantasy theme that bears no relation to our history does try to tackle the subject of slavery without the necessary stones to pull it off. It's not entirely as bad as it sounds, because unlike other board games, it at least presents you with the consequences of your choices, and that's a teachable moment. I'm just not sure that The King's Dilemma, a game where you make awful choices for a laugh, is the right tool to discuss the subject of slavery. One of my fondest memories of this game was when a particularly crucial dilemma card was revealed. Outcomes of dilemma cards will generally manipulate the game's 5 resources on this board, swinging them into positive or negative states. Because at the start of each game, each player will receive an endgame scoring card, be it opulent or rebel, they'll want these resources to sit in certain spaces. If I'm opulent, then I want all the resources to be really high, whereas if I'm a rebel, I want to create the largest divide. So on that particularly crucial dilemma card, I was sure that one of the outcomes would not only position this precarious board state into perfect alignment for me, but it would also end the game, meaning I would be exactly where I wanted. All I had to do was win the bid. Each player bids power towards yay or nay, or alternatively they can pass to buy their time and collect some extra power, or take on the role of the adjudicator, collecting bribes in case of a tie in power. Unless you've been quiet as a mouse the entire game, you will not have enough power to win the bid by yourself. So you'll have to cajole others into bidding your way. So I cajoled, and I begged, I pleaded, I threatened, I promised, and I negotiated. And you know what happened? I don't remember. But the reason I don't remember is that I wasn't paying any attention to what the dilemma was about. I just cared about the outcome until someone said, "Do you even know what you're bidding for?" I didn't. I was so enthralled by the promise of power that I would have sold my own mother if it got me what I wanted. If that's not a mirror of real-world politics, I don't know what is. The King's Dilemma is a transformative experience, and the power of its transformation is that it takes you to the bad place and puts you in charge. That alone should cement it as our game of the year. But would you like to tell them why it isn't our game of the year?
Is it that I don't like bidding games or that I can't make a decision?
I don't know, you pick one.
Apologies everyone, but I'm the spoilsport that didn't like the King's Dilemma. It's just a ball of things I hate in life wrapped into an experience, so playing it felt about as fun as putting my hand into a nest of bees. However, I am big enough to admit that the King's Dilemma is as stellar as Efka says it is. I can see why people would fall head over heels for it, and I appreciate the craft. It's great, but I have no desire to love it, and it's only great for 50% of no pun included.
Which gives it our very first 50% Game of the Year award. Can't wait to see Horrible Guild put that on the next printing. In The King is Dead, the king is dead. But never mind kids, kings are like goldfish. When one dies, you can just pop a balloon and win a new one. But popping balloons was hard work in medieval Britain, so you'll need the help of the English, the Scottish, or the Welsh to put your goldfish on a seat in the bowl. Throne. The good people of England, Scotland and Wales are represented by wooden cubes, and you'll use cards to shuffle these cubes around the map, changing the amount of power that those factions bring to the different regions. The deceptively simple part of The King is Dead is that at the start of the game you will get 8 action cards, and that's all you have for the entire 8 rounds of the game, and you can play as many cards in a round as you like, meaning that you could play all your 8 action cards on the very first round and then do nothing else for the rest of the game. It would be stupid, but you could do it. Whenever you play a card, you get to snaffle up any follower on the board. This is important, but we'll come back to that later. Let's have a look at this region. That's Amore. Each round, one region will have a power struggle. Because the Scots have more cubes than anyone else, they take control of Amore. When all power struggles have been carried out, we'll check to see which faction has the most overall control. In this case, Scotland, because they have 3 control discs, whereas both England and Wales only have 2 each. This is where those followers I've been talking about become very important, because the faction that has the most control gets to crown the new king, and the person they choose is the person who has the most followers of their faction.
Or that might not happen at all. The King is Dead wouldn't be NPI's Game of the Year if it didn't have more oh boy moments than the entire first season of Quantum Leap. The game might end early right when you don't want it to, the followers that you do want might disappear off the board, or there could be an invasion by the French. But before we let's talk more about followers. Playing this cube war is reminiscent of chess mixed with stocks and shares. The toing and froing of chess, deciding which piece to take and which to move, with the causality of those actions creating fluctuations in the value of stock. Cubes. Gravy. Let's say you want Wales to win this region. You can play a card moving Welsh cubes, and every time that you play a card you get to take 1 follower, which means that you only actually get to take 8 new followers through the entire course of the game. And remember, having the right followers is what lets you do the winning. If you take a Welsh cube, great, Wales now has an extra region and you now have a greater chance of having the most Welsh. But there are other regions that haven't yet resolved their power struggle. The follower that you wanted to take could go towards helping to secure a region in the future. And if you take a red cube, then there's less red cubes overall. After an extended session of biting your nails, you opt for a Scottish cube instead, which is the opposite of what you wanted because you just helped Wales win. Meanwhile, your opponent plays a card and takes a Welsh follower, meaning that they now have more than you do. You have spent one of your 8 turns in this entire game to achieve the opposite of what you wanted to, and also helped your opponent. Nice. Taking a cube is like being offered 2 sandwiches, but you don't know what's in them. Do you take the one that looks tastier now, or save that one for later, risking that it might not be there when you come back to it? Sometimes you just have to take a bite and see what you get. Coronation bravery or coronation chicken.
But remember the French? No one ever does, and that's how they get you. When power struggles are resolved to see whether England, Scotland or Wales controls the region, if there are an equal number of faction cubes or no faction cubes at all, the French will be all like,
come eat fromage d'amour with me, it will be beautiful.
And then bang! That region is now under control by the French. If the French manage to woo 3 regions, they have successfully invaded, and it won't matter hee-haw that you have a whole sporran of Scottish followers behind you. The game will end immediately with no faction declared dominant. Having the most followers of a faction becomes meaningless. Now you need everyone to support you equally by having sets of cubes in all 3 colours. I understand. You're saying to yourself, Efka, this still feels like a straightforward game. Play a card, take a cube, 2 ways to win. Voila. And you know what? You'd be right, except this game is like repotting a cactus. It seems straightforward until you actually try it, which is an analogy that works for anyone who repotted a cactus. And since most of you haven't, just take my word for it, it's really hard.
What seems like a pretty venture to Katamari up followers becomes a sword fight on a trapeze that activates at least 3 brain cells. One for what you're doing, one to keep an eye on the board state, and one to make sure your opponents don't outsmart you. Let's tickle your cells one more time. Instead of playing a card, you can pass. Often passing in a game isn't great. You're watching the game happen around you whilst you're waiting for resources or whatever. The King is Dead is different because doing nothing in this game can be more impactful than doing everything. The puzzle lies at the bottom of the cards, more specifically when and how you play them. Let's say you're in a situation where things are looking good, but there's one region that you just know is going to make or break it for you. You can use as many cards as you like to try and secure it, fending off any actions that the other players take until finally the other players give up and let you have it. And in that one instant when everyone else dejectedly says, pass, you realise you've been had. You've been fighting the good fight, but the only one who's been fighting it is you. Everyone else has just been humouring you to get cards out of your hand. How much did that cost you? 3 cards? 4? Now you only have 4 cards left for the whole rest of the game. Fine maybe if you're halfway through, not so fine if it's the first power struggle. After passing, if the other player takes an action, play comes back to you. When both of you pass one after the other, the round ends and the power struggle is resolved. This means that you could take your chances, pass initially and scope out the landscape. But if your opponent passes as well and the territory isn't at all in a state that you want it to be, you've just blundered into defeat, once again costing your opponent nothing. The cards themselves have different abilities. Most of them allow you to transfer followers or add followers to different regions. Cleverly coaxing followers into regions lets you manipulate the situation to your advantage, but there's one card that's ultra devious. The Negotiate card allows you to swap when 2 regions will be resolved, and that might seem monumentally powerful. Just imagining a blazing battle get doused with a bucket of cold card play makes me want to stop this review and go and play this game again. But the genius of this design is that every card is great, you just have to play them at the right time. The King is Dead always has scope to make you feel smart, but also to make you feel like a royal fool. Why did I do that? How did I not see that move coming? And other stories. So many times I thought I'd sussed out what was going on, and then a negotiation card played swaps around 2 regions. The region that I thought was being resolved was now 3 power struggles away, and the region that I hadn't worried about because it was 3 power struggles away was flicking at my ears for attention. Because there's 2 ways to win, you're always trying to work out not only the moves that are best for you, but also what your opponent is trying to do in an ever-changing landscape. Each game you'll start with 2 randomly dealt followers, and the map will be populated with 4 random followers in each territory. The only consistency between the games is that Essex, Murray and Gwynedd will have an initial seed of the English, Scottish and Welsh. This seemingly innocuous random distribution always creates a different puzzle. Say I'm dealt 2 Welsh followers to my personal supply, but there are significantly fewer Welsh followers on the map to win and control territories. Does that mean I'm stuffed from the get-go? That might seem true until I notice that my opponent also has 1 Welsh follower and 1 English. So what's the plan? Get Scotland to win? As you progress, the goalposts keep shuffling in a shell game. Scotland might have just been a ruse. Your real goal was to win through a French invasion. But then you realise that you've magically ended up with more English followers than your opponent. And now you're blowing England's trumpet. Figuratively. The pathways become narrower, making you think you're about to finally find the right exit in this hall of mirrors. You dive towards it, taking the cubes that you need, playing the cards at the right time, and then you hit your head on the glass. You got too complacent. You didn't see it coming.
The King is Dead is not a long game, but the entire time you feel swathed in its luxury. I mean, your goal is to be king after all, so might as well start acting like it. Every illustration, every piece of art is reminiscent of the most royal medieval illuminated manuscripts, swaddling you in the theme without it ever feeling heavy or cumbersome. Thanks to the brilliantly placed artwork by Benoit Billon, it becomes an almost immersive experience. Add in a bowl of frumenty and a madrigal, and you'd be there. Also, I'm sure it's just a coincidence that this invasion of arresting artwork happens to come from a French person. Board Game Geek player count poll seems to be in consensus that The King is Dead is predominantly a 3-player game, with 2- and 4-player versions being ancillary. Well, Board Game Geek is wrong, at least in this instance. In fact, although by a small margin, the 3-player version is my least favourite way to play because it runs into the dreaded Kingmaker dilemma that plagues 3-player area control games. If you play with 2, The King is Dead transforms into a heated chess battle with one player pushing the offensive and the other hoping to turn the tide. If you play with 4, you split up into 2 teams where you can't talk shop with your partner, but only one of you needs to be crowned king for the entire team to win. Which is obviously A, ridiculous, and B, amazing. Although I wouldn't recommend playing the 4-player game until you had a few 2- or 3-player games under your belt, and when I say a few, I mean like 10. But no matter how many people you play with, you'll all have a great time. And here's an added bonus. Because each player count feels so diverse and different, you basically have 3 different games in the box. 4, if you count the advanced game, which brings us to my absolute favorite way to play The King is Dead. In the Ready Salted version, everyone starts with the same cards, but the advanced game makes the decks asymmetrical by adding in new cards. Each player removes the Welsh support, Scottish support and English support cards and draws 3 random cards from a deck that has 0 duplicates, meaning that 3 cards in your rival's hand are a total mystery. Imagine playing a game of chess where you don't know how many rooks or bishops your opponent has or whether they have any at all. Sounds outrageous? Wait till I tell you about the plot card. Unlike other cards, the plot card can never be played, so no matter what happens in the game, you will always have 1 follower fewer than your opponent. That's bad. But then, the plot card acts as a master tiebreaker, meaning as long as you can engineer a tie at the end of the game, you win. And that's the beauty of the advanced mode summed up in 1 card. Your opponent has no idea what's in your hand, but they know that the plot card exists, and as soon as you start playing like you're trying to tie, they'll suss you out and crush you. If you can keep it a secret, if you can pirouette around this battlefield pretending to support various claims, you might just have it. I think what I like most about this is that neither of you have to even have the plot card. Just the mere fact that it exists alone makes everyone dance to a different tune. You probably already know if this game isn't for you. It's incredibly lean, and if you like meaty games and need rules to lose yourself in, you won't find this here. And whilst we're on the subject of ties, there's a few finicky tiebreaker rules that are hard to remember and important to remember, because this game is so sharp that most of the time you will actively build your strategy around winning tiebreakers.
Otherwise, we've never felt so confident naming our Game of the Year, and this isn't even a 2020 game. Despite being a second edition, it's actually a third iteration of this system, and it's been around as long as Pandemic. I know some of you might feel it's a bit unfair us giving this award to a reprint, but it's new to us, and I'm pretty sure it's new to most audiences. Consider this: if we thought this was worthy in spite of not being a new game, then there's something truly special about it.
And finally, it's responsible for this Twitter interaction that is covering up Elaine's face, where designer of Root and PAX Premier Cole Worley said that King of Siam, the first version of The King is Dead, is what inspired him to design board games, which prompted me to go and find my copy of PAX Premier 2nd edition and discover so much of this game's DNA inside of it. So there you go, a 2020 release, pre-packaged with immortalized board game history. Enjoy. This video is sponsored by Skillshare, the online learning community that offers thousands of classes on various subjects, from interior design to photography to even board game design. Skillshare is your opportunity to figure out that thing that you wanted to figure out but haven't quite known how to figure it out yet. I've used Skillshare to learn about project management, caring for houseplants, and even sunset photography. But it doesn't always have to be serious things. Sometimes you just need something simple and nourishing. Ilana Karp's mini class, The Perfect Grilled Cheese, taught me just that, how to make a perfect grilled cheese. Just look at it. Oh, I'm so sorry, that's terribly rude of me. Would you like some of this grilled cheese sandwich? Well, you can't have any of this grilled cheese sandwich because this is my grilled cheese sandwich. But you can learn how to make your own grilled cheese sandwich because Skillshare Premium is less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. And the first 1,000 of our subscribers to click the link in the description can get a free trial of Skillshare Premium so you can unlock your creativity and, most importantly, your grilled cheese sandwich.